Good evening to you all. I want to welcome you this evening to this webinar, which is brought to you by the advisory services in the Teagasc, Roscommon, Longford region. This evening, the theme is farm schemes. My name is Seán Doorley. I'm a Teagasc advisor based in the Longford office. This evening, this webinar, we will be giving you an up-to-date on the changes that have come about for most schemes in 2021. And in this webinar, we will be covering specifically BEAM, BDGP, BEEP-S, and TAMS. Schemes are very important for farmers. They have been an excellent means of support for farmers down through the years, and it's very important that all farmers claim schemes, payments that they are eligible for, and also that they retain any payments that they receive and avoid getting penalties where possible. This evening, we're delighted to have two speakers. We have Charlie Devaney, who is based in the Castlereagh office, and we also have Conor Dobson, who is based in the Longford office. Also here we have Donal McCabe, who is here to help us with questions towards the end of the webinar. So the format for this evening is a 20-minute presentation given by each of our two speakers, and approximately 20 minutes at the end for questions, where Donal will be putting the questions to the panelists. So at the bottom of your screens, you will see a Q&A tab. Here you can type in your questions, and you can type them in as you think of them throughout the evening. All questions will be answered live here by our two panelists. Any questions that we were unable to answer, we will email them on to you, the answer to you afterwards. So all questions will be answered live. We won't be typing any questions, and you'll be only able to see your own questions that you put to the panelists. So just want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to see it in a number of days on our YouTube channel. And our YouTube channel is Roscommon Longford Teagasc. If you follow our social media accounts such as Facebook and Twitter, you'll be able to find that link to the YouTube video. So first of all, our first speaker this evening is Charlie Devaney, and Charlie will be covering the BEAM, the BDGP, and the BEEP-S program. So I'll ask Charlie to share his screen there. And you can unmute yourself there as well, Charlie.
Okay, hello to everybody. Again, thanks for everybody just come on the call tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some answers to the questions that you have on your minds. To follow on from what Seán was saying, I think it's vitally important from the area of the country that we're based in here. I'm based in Castlereagh as a Teagasc advisor there for a good many years, and what we've found is that the importance of schemes is huge. And one of the first things I'd said to farmers when they come in my door if they're looking for advice would be join and trying to get into every scheme you can actually get into. So it's huge. It's 85% of dry stock farmers, suckler farmers, however you want to term them, they're more than their income. That's 85% of their income. Say when you're looking at their income at the end of the year, more than that 85%, that's where most of their income comes into schemes. And then there's 15% that make a small income on the farm, and then the schemes make up the rest. So 85% of farmers, if they didn't have schemes, wouldn't be making or showing any profit on the farm. So that's a huge thing. But we're not going to dwell on that tonight. I suppose the other thing and the other reason that I got involved in the webinar tonight was because I suppose we're in a little bit of unknown territory at the moment. The cap that was to finish, would say, at the end of 2019, a new cap to start in 2020. Obviously, that didn't take place because of Brexit and because of COVID. It put a huge slowdown on that. So that there's a vacuum there at the moment. And you know, all through last year, there was talk what would happen, people that were in the BDGP, that were in the GLAS, that were in all these other different schemes. So when we're going down through it, we'll try and make you aware of what the situation is, and hopefully then you'll be able to make the most of the schemes as you go along. I suppose the three main schemes I'm going to cover tonight is the BEAM scheme, the BEEP scheme, and the BDGP scheme. The other thing I find when farmers come in and visit me in the office, they have huge problems trying to know which scheme is which. So there's BEAM and there's BEEP. Unfortunately, both of them sound very similar. And again, for myself, if I wasn't dealing with them most days or talking about them most days, it is genuinely very confusing. And BDGP, and most people at times nearly don't know what scheme they're in. So as I say, these are the three I'm going to concentrate on tonight and try and make it as clear as possible. First of all, that you know what scheme you're in and what scheme you're trying to get right. And as Seán mentioned there earlier on, the importance of avoiding penalties is huge as well. So the first scheme I'm going to cover is the BEAM scheme. And I suppose the best way to remember this scheme is the scheme with the 5% reduction. So that's the 5% average reduction. So it's based on a reference period, the 1st July 2018 to the 30th of June 2019. So for this scheme, you would have applied for it in 2019, and you would have got paid for it at the end of 2019. So the money has already been paid out. So now what you're trying to do is you're looking at achieving a 5% reduction between the 1st of July 2020 and the 30th of June 2021. Again, I suppose anyone that's been watching the local or the national papers, you'll have seen a huge amount of information on this scheme, a huge amount of the people saying that the 5% should be reduced, that it wasn't fair, and that had been spoke about for a good number of months. But all along, the department were quite solid and quite firm in their answer that wasn't going to be the case. So what happened then was the government then looked to see could they change the reference period. So from guys that might be having difficulties, what they're saying now, you can opt for what's called a new reduction period. And that reduction period is from the 1st of the 1st, 2021 to the 31st of the 12th, 2020. So the 1st of the 1st, 2021 to the 31st of the 12th, 2021, which is this year. So I suppose to try and broaden that out a little bit and make sense of it. So I suppose if you're to take nothing away from this slide, other than the BEAM scheme is the scheme that's related to the 5% reduction. Secondly, we're at the moment in Teagasc. I know we've been in contact with most of our clients, and we have an Excel program ourselves that we can do up, and we can kind of guide guys on how they're getting on the scheme, whether they're in around the 5%, whether they need to reduce it more, or whether they're well over it. Also, there's a program on the ICBF, and I'll bring that up on the screen after a while and go through that with you as well. So there are different options there if you're looking to see or to get a guide of where you're going with the scheme. And also the new reduction period, which is now going to run from the 1st of January 2021 to the 31st of December 2021. You can opt in for that. Now that option isn't there yet, but as far as we're aware, you can email the department from April to probably early June, and you can decide to go for that new reference period if you want. But remember, once you decide to go for that new reference period, you can't go back and go for the original reference period that was in place there, which was from the 1st of July 2020 to the 30th of June 2021. So once you opt for the new reduction period, you have to stay with that. So what we're advising people to do, meet up with your advisor, look at your figures. I've done it over the last couple of days where guys are close to the 5%. What we're saying to one another is we'll keep an eye on it over the next couple of months, and come May, early June, at that stage, if it's a thing that we think that the figure isn't going to be hit, at that stage we will opt for the new reduction period, but not until then. even though you can opt for it in April. What I'd advise most people is if you're struggling to hit the 5%, 5% would say average reduction that was already in place, you can opt for this. I know on my own number of farmers that I'm dealing with that the number of people looking at this is quite low. So don't, I suppose, opt for it unless you think it's necessary for you. Okay. Just to give you an idea, I suppose, and why I put up this slide was, I think this is going to become more and more important as we go along over the next number of years. The environmental side of farming is getting huge. The 5% reduction was put in there because of the environmental requirement of trying to reduce down stock and trying to reduce down emissions. Will that come into other schemes in the future? Quite possibly, I suppose we don't know. Is this a tester, we'll say, for going forward? Again, quite possibly, we don't know. But for the purposes of this scheme, a dairy cow, and I know these figures, you may not have seen them before, but why I said I'd put them up tonight, it wasn't to confuse you, but it was to give you an idea of what maybe you'd be looking at over the next couple of years. So when you have a dairy cow on the farm, they consider that to be producing 85 kilos of nitrogen. A suckler cow on the farm, 65 kilos of nitrogen. A 0 to 1, 24 kilos of nitrogen. A 1 to 2 animal, 57 kilos of nitrogen. And an animal over 2 years, 65 kilos of nitrogen. So for example, if you have 10 suckler cows on your farm over a 12-month period, so one cow is going to produce 65 kilos of nitrogen over the 12 months, 10 cows will produce 650. And that's how that's how your figure was worked out, would say, to decide what you needed to hit in beam. And these figures, as I think, as time goes on, as the environment is getting more and more important, I think these are the types of figures maybe we'll be looking in the future. It may not be stocking rate, but it may be kilos of nitrogen that animals are producing. So the more, I suppose, we can make ourselves aware or kind of become kind of familiar with these figures, all the better, okay? As I mentioned earlier on, we have an Excel program that we've been using for the last number of months. And again, we've used this with a number of our farmers, and we would have sent it out to a number of farmers as well. ICBF have a beam calculator, and I'll just click into that. And also, if you log on to Ag Food, you'll see the nitrogen that was produced on your farm up to the 31st of December 2020. And I suppose another word of advice maybe would be that any farmer, I think every farmer should have an Ag Food account. That's your own personal account where you can go in and you can look at your own details on that. So the amount of information that we gotten of that is huge. And again, I think what has been shown over COVID over the last 10, 12 months, the importance of the internet and how we've all become more familiar with it. Even myself, I would consider myself not technically very strong, but you've been forced into this area of becoming more technically user-friendly. So again, an Ag Food account, and if you're confused on it, just contact your advisor and they'll help you set it up. So it gives you access to your own individual information, which I think is huge and will give you great insight into what's happening on your farm. You can use it for accounts. You can use it for many different things. I'm just going to switch over here into the Excel program and the ICBF, just to give you an idea of what you can see on that. If I can get it up here now. Okay, I might just leave it there. I just don't seem to be able to get into it there at the moment. Okay. Right, I'll go back to where I was. So basically, there is an Excel program on the screen that you can use, and that can be, so based on ICBF, I know I couldn't get up there at the moment, sorry about that. So basically on ICBF, what there is you can if you're a member of Herd Plus, you can click into that. You can see the number of animals that are on your farm up to, let's say, at the end of January, and you can predict what animals are going to be on your farm up to the end of June, and you can use that as a guide to what amount of nitrogen will be produced on the farm. So that's very handy, and you can decide whether you need to do a reduction or not. Okay. So moving on to the BEEP scheme. The BEEP scheme is, I suppose, again, how I would pronounce this scheme or how I would make people aware of it. This is what's called the weigh-in scheme. So that's the way I would, I suppose, kind of recognize it. So the beep and the beam. The beam, I would say, is the 5% reduction scheme to try and make it common language. The beep scheme is, say, where you're weighing the cow and calf. That's always been a 12-month scheme. We had the second scheme last year in 2020. That was the BEEP scheme. That's now finished since the end of 2020. And now there's talk of a new BEEP scheme been starting off shortly. I suppose what I said there is a new scheme will be announced, but when will it be? I think it's in the next couple of weeks is when it's supposed to be announced. So again, with the BEEP scheme, you have to sign up to it again. Even though you're in that scheme last year, that's finished and done with since the 31st of December. So you have to rejoin that scheme again. If you have a weigh-in scales, that weigh-in scales has to be re-registered, and it's a 12-month scheme. So even though you join it this year, and what I would advise with this scheme is for everybody would be join it. There's no disadvantage in joining it. If you join it and you don't do anything, you won't get a payment, but there is no penalty. But the one thing to be aware of, if the terms and conditions are similar to the last two schemes that were there, that any calf born on your farm since the 1st of July 2020, you can draw money down on them. But I know a number of the farmers I deal with last year, they had a lot of them calves sold or weaned. So I'd be advising people at the moment, and this is partly the reason why we said we'd do this update on the schemes, weigh them calves now. Even though the BEEP scheme isn't open and you can't put them up on the ICBF sheet, keep that information there and you can record at a later date. Okay, you can record them on ICBF, but not on the BEEP part of it. So keep that information there and you can record at a later date. Important, the part that is compulsory is the cow and the calf has to be weighed on the same day. So very important that you weigh the cow and the calf on the same day. Okay, and then you have the two optional extras, which is meal feeding or vaccination or dung sampling. Just something, yeah. So basically the maximum payment you can get out of it per animal is on the first 10 cows, you can get €90 per cow. And then on any cow after that, €80 per cow after that, if you go for the three options. If you're meal feeding, so just saying there, weigh the cow and the calf on the same day. Autumn born calves can now be weighed. And in normal circumstances, when the BEEP scheme opens up, if you have a cow and calf weighed, and if you hire, say, scales from some of the companies that you can hire them from, you have to register that weight within 7 days. Ideally, you weigh the calf between 150 and 250 days, but they can be weighed at any stage. So technically, there's nothing to stop you from weighing the calf when it's a week or 2 weeks old along with the cow. But again, make sure to weigh the cow and the calf on the same day. So calf was born last July. I know at this stage, some people might be thinking about selling them calves. So I'd say even before the scheme opens, weigh the cow and the calf. And then when the scheme's open, you can record that information at that stage, okay? But I know I had a number of farmers last year that lost out on that payment. And I suppose because the scheme didn't open up until the end of March last year, and again, we weren't fully sure if it was going to open. We know it's going to open this year. So if you have intended on selling some of them autumn born calves or weaning them, get them weighed now, okay? So the options that you can pick, you don't have to go with is, you can do your meal feeding, which means meal feeding the calf for 4 weeks before they're weaned. And then that calf has to be kept on the farm for 2 weeks before it's sold. Okay. So that's the one, I suppose, that you need to be very careful with to make sure that you record your dates properly. These dates don't have to be sent anywhere, but if you get an inspection, they will be checked. So if you record them, you have to make sure that the receipts for the meal are matching up with the dates that you wean the calf. So you'll have to show receipts on your farm for at least 4 weeks before weaning, and the calf can't be sold for at least 2 weeks after he's weaned. So be very careful with that. I know a number of my own farmers were caught out on it last year, okay? So as I say, the meal feeding one, if you do choose, and a lot of farmers will be doing it anyway, and it's something that is easy to choose, but just make sure to get your dates right. They don't have to be sent into the department. Record them in a book somewhere, and then if you get an inspection, you can upload them or give them at that stage. Also, If you don't want to go for the meal feeding, you can go for vaccination. And again, I suppose what I'd advise on this one is, if you have issues on your farm with pneumonia or viruses on your farm, this one is very useful. But again, something that I've heard used throughout the years is that if something isn't broken, don't fix it. So if it's a situation that on your farm that you've never had a virus problem, let's say when your calves go into the shed with pneumonia, but what I would say is maybe there's no need to go for that vaccination one. So it can be the vaccination or the meal feeding. If you go with the vaccination, there's two options. You can go for the option one, which means you give a one-shot vaccination 2 to 4 weeks before weaning, one for a single shot for RSV and PI3, and another shot for IBR. If you go for the two-shot option, you do that twice, once 68 weeks before weaning, and the second time 2 to 4 weeks before weaning, and then the second time you also give the one for IBR. So that's for the vaccination. Again, if it's an issue on your farm, it's something I would consider. But if it never has been an issue and you find that it's something that you don't need to be vaccinating for, well, then maybe think twice. So just as I say, you all know your own farms far better maybe than we do, and you know what works on your own farms year in, year out. So choose something that is going to give you, an advantage when you're on your own farm. What's going to be useful on your own farm.
Just 2 minutes, Charlie.
So I have to move along fairly fast here. So the BDGP 1 scheme finished on the 31st of December 2020, and everybody got the option to roll over there up to the 15th of January until the end of 2021. So if you go for this, sorry, I should have been there the previous 6 years. The first scheme was a 6-year scheme, and if you go for this scheme, even though you might get, say, inspected or penalised, there will be no clawback on the money that you got in the previous 6 years. So again, as part of the scheme, it's similar to what was there before. You have to complete a carbon navigator in 2021, but it's for the year 20. Your genomic sampling has to take place on 60% of your reference figure. If you're using AI, 80% 4 or 5-star AI usage. If you're using a bull, has to be a 4 or 5-star stock bull on your farm on the 30th of June. And what I should have been there as well, it should be genomically sampled. Again, on your farm, 50% 4 or 5-star cows or heifers over 16 months of age on the 31st of October 2021, and they have to be genomically sampled as well. In BDGP 2, that scheme isn't going to finish until the end of 2022. And just on BDGP 1, just to mention it, there is a rollover for a year, for 12 months this year, and it looks more than likely that rollover will be offered again at the end of this year, and you can go for a further year. Again, BDGP 2, the rules are similar, just that they're slightly different years. Again, 60% has to be genotyped every year, and fill in all the surveys throughout the year, and I should have mentioned that in the BDGP 1 slide. 4 or 5-star genomically tested bull on the 30th of June 2022, and 50% 4 or 5-star cows or heifers over 16 months of age genomically sampled on the 30th of October 2022 on your farm as well. Okay, so that's it, Seán. I know Seán said there at the start that you can send in questions and we'll answer them at the end, so I look forward to any questions you have, and I'm hoping that I haven't you further confused, and that hopefully it's throws some light on where you're going with the schemes. And say, once you're aware of where you're at, that's the most important thing. And as I say, at the moment, we're looking at a rollover this year, a rollover possibly next year, and then the new CAP scheme to kick in 2023. So thanks, and Seán, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Charlie, very much. If you can just stop sharing your screen there.
Okay, Seán. Right, yeah.
Grand, thanks very much for that, Charlie. Now I'll ask Conor there to just get his presentation ready. And I suppose while he's getting ready there, just want to remind you, if you are on a mobile phone, just make sure it is well charged, and just keep an eye on that. Yeah, look at we'll move on next to Conor. Conor is going to be covering the TAMS. So look at TAMS has been there in existence the last 5-6 years or so. So we have another tranche there at the moment. So Conor, I'll hand it over to you. And
okay, Seán, thank you. I'll just share the screen here. So So
Yeah,
can you see that there?
that looks good. Yeah. Okay.
That's grand. So look, I suppose what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is the TAMS scheme, the TAMS 2 scheme. And I suppose what I'm going to take you through is basically what we need to know before you build or whatever. So sorry.
You just want to move it along, is it, Conor?
Yeah, that's
yeah,
grand.
just set your up and down.
Yeah, that's good. So look at the funding. It's co-funded by the National Exchequer and the EU, and to date there's probably about 245 million paid out to date. Probably 1.4 million per week over the period. There has been at the moment there's about 6,000 outstanding claims. So I suppose if anyone has a claim that needs to be, it's a good idea to get it in and get paid on it. At this moment, the scheme there was a high level of interest there in the last tranche, which would close on the 15th of January. There was 4,200 new applications lodged. And I suppose there was a bit of uncertainty, maybe the high numbers, there was a bit of uncertainty as to whether the scheme would continue for 2021. But they announced a new tranche then to take us to the 15th of April. So the new tranche is running to then. So basically, what are the different elements to the scheme? So we have a young farmer capital investment scheme, we have a dairy equipment scheme, an organic capital investment scheme, low emission slurry spreading, pig and poultry investment scheme, animal welfare safety, and nutrient management. And we have a tillage capital investment scheme. So there's a range of different schemes, and I suppose it's important when people, that they apply for the proper scheme. Who is eligible? Any farmer with a herd, flock, or serial number for the 40% grant. A young farmer is entitled to a 60% grant. And basically, a young farmer is less than 5 years since applying for the herd number. They're under 40 years of age, and they have a green cert in hand. If the green cert isn't finished at the time, if not in hand, the top up is held for up to 36 months until the cert is produced, and then the 20%, the extra 20% is paid at that stage. So investment ceilings, basically the general investments has a ceiling of 80,000. Partnerships, registered farm partnerships, a ceiling of 160,000. Less, or the low emission scheme, has a ceiling of 40,000, or in a partnership 60,000. Young farmers must apply for the low emission scheme under the YFCIS in order to get the 60% grant. The minimum amount of spend or to make a valid application is €2,000, and it's 5,000 for the less scheme. So basically, how does the scheme work? Scheme operates totally online. It runs in 3-month tranches, and no applications are looked at until the end of the 3 months. So all the applications come in, and then they're assessed from there. Cannot commence work or purchase equipment until you get an approval into your hand. So you're paid on the lesser amount, reference or actual, the reference cost or the actual cost, up to the department reference costs. VAT not included or grant aided in reference costs. Approval lasts for either 6 months or 12 months, depending on the investments. So the work must be done and the claim must be in by that particular date. So what is available? I suppose animal housing. When it comes to animal housing, you have sheep housing, suckler housing, dairy housing, dairy cubicle sheds, calf housing. So all investments are covered. Parts of animal housing, then you have scrapers, be they manuals or ordinary scrapers or robotic scrapers. Goat housing is included, and meal bins as well are included on the scheme. Animal handling facilities are also covered, or they could be integrated into a new farm building, or they could be standalone outdoor fixed. Could also be mobile handling facilities, so portable crushes or penning up to a maximum of 75 meters. Cattle handling equipment then are also covered. So you have your leg hoist lifter of the reference cost of €252. You have a head scoop, the reference cost 379. A calf dehorning crate, reference cost of 419, and the weighing scales Charlie was talking about, the beef best and the weigh, and the reference cost for this is €1,164. So they're all eligible investments. Sheep handling facilities, be they fixed races, footbaths or dipping areas or whatever, or they could be mobile either, which suits some people with maybe different outblocks of land. So they're both eligible. So again, looking at the sheep handling equipment, these are just the reference costs for the different, some cases it's per item, or some people it's for meter squared. So you're talking about the handling facility, the portable sheep handling race, the weighing scales, and different mobile sheep penning. So you have a range of investments that are eligible, and the reference cost for same. Sheep fencing, I suppose, is very popular, and it's a lot of farmers have availed of it. So basically, it's a fencing rate. The reference cost is €5.34 per meter. In a lowland situation, in a mountainous area, it's €8.01 cent per meter, and gates are included then at a rate of €299, the reference cost. I suppose the other thing is you must have a minimum of 40 adult sheep in order to be eligible. And the other thing is that some areas of archaeology or fencing is not allowed, so you have to check before you make your submission. Is some of the areas that you're talking about fencing in an archaeological site area or in a special area of conservation, because the department will not grant aid fencing in these situations. So again, go back to other investments. So you have your silage pits there as an eligible investment, and silage pit with maybe 2.4 meter walls. The reference cost of these are €309 a meter. For the floor, it's €32 per meter squared. And again, you have effluent channels, which are costed separately at €8.70 per meter. So as well as the farm buildings, we also have investments in safety elements, as part of that animal welfare section of the scheme. So you can have safety rails on silo walls, replacements of hinged doors with new sliding or roller doors, new roof lighting, and with safety cages, and down to so wheel changing crates, wheel pumping crates, and hydraulic motors to substitute PTO shafts. So these are just general safety elements that have been granted. Slurry storage is a big part of it as well, be it a new build, also the bubble agitation system is new. It's there to be to be grant aided. Replacement of flats, you know, in an old shed, they can be included as an eligible investment. Obviously, if you're need larger slurry storage, you know, circular towers are covered by the scheme. Also, dungsteads and roof dungsteads are covered by the scheme. Also, I suppose dairy structures and equipment are come under it. So be it you know, your milking parlour, your dairy, or your plant room. And I suppose then you're talking about you know, say bulk tank, plate cooler, ice builders, water heaters, heat transfer units, and auto washers are all covered by the scheme. And obviously, the milking machine itself, be it you know, a standard cluster unit, a robotic or a rotary, are all part of the dairy structures and equipment. Collecting yard is also covered, be it solid or slatted. Roofing of a collecting yard is part of the scheme. Walls, entrance gates, and barriers are also included in a collecting yard. Also in parlour meal feeding, be it the batch feeders, meal bins or meal troughs are covered. I suppose other areas that's covered in TAMS, you have your pigs and your poultry, you know, say looking at housing, feeding systems, and energy saving equipment, you know, say it's the likes of solar panels or other energy saving equipment. Also, tillage and organics is covered. You're talking about till machinery, rainwater harvesting, GPS systems, you know, sprayers, grain storage and treatment, and fertilizer spreaders. So I suppose also is covered, I suppose, with the new changes now, and you know, so the environment being a big part of it. So a lot of people have taken advantage of the low emission slurry spreading scheme, and you know, say the likes of dribble bar, trail and shoe, shallow injection or umbilical systems are all grant aided, up to a max of, you know, say spend of 40,000 or whatever. So they'll be included in the LESS scheme. So I suppose what I want to cover then a bit about is just some planning permission. So I suppose for new builds or you know, say if you go through the you know, the scheme document, there's a certain amount of structures or areas that need planning permission, and planning permission or a declaration of exemption is required for a number of eligible investments. So evidence of a full grant of planning permission, revised planning where required, or a declaration of exemption. So a declaration of exemption just basically says it's basically a letter from the council to say that there's you know, the proposed works do not need planning, must accompany the application. So you have to have your full planning in hand before you make your application. It has to be lodged with the application. No notification of a decision to grant will not be sufficient for this purpose. And where any changes are made to the proposals covered by planning permission, you know, then a revised planning is needed. Some tolerances are allowed. Small tolerances are allowed in the scheme of things. So I suppose what we're saying is for certain items of buildings, you know, planning permission is required, and you need the full planning. I suppose what I want to cover now is just a little bit about the common pitfalls that we encounter at planning or application stage, or where people get caught up. I suppose application submitted under the wrong scheme, you know, it's maybe looking to apply for the 60% grant and they apply under the 40%. The health and safety course maybe not completed or needs to be completed. Project supervisor you know, not included. Land lease 5 years from payment date. I suppose that's where you know, developments are taking place on leased land. Tax clearance, you know, say for the individual, and folio and map not right. So I suppose all buildings, you know, say or sheep fencing or whatever, the folio maybe not right. So that needs to be maybe rectified by going to land registry or land direct beforehand. And I suppose another big one that we encounter is not a lot of research done into you know, what they're proposing to do. From that point of view, just basically going in with an application blind and probably end up maybe in the long run not building or doing the works involved. I suppose the other thing is common pitfalls during the project is Card A, which is the commencement notice is not submitted. Payments not coming from the applicant account is a huge problem, I suppose. You know, the payments have to be traced from the applicant's account, and it has to be the same account as the herd number or whatever. So a lot of scenarios there. The department have the wherewithal to check all these or whatever. So you have to make sure that they're you're not paying out of 2 or 3 accounts for the work that's done. Missing the deadline obviously is a big problem for some people. Sourcing materials, you know, getting the materials or getting the machine within the time frame. Change of entity then, I suppose, if people apply as an individual, maybe on a herd number, and then move from into a partnership or move into a company or whatever. So they're some of the common pitfalls. I suppose the other thing then is payments at the claim, or pitfalls at the claim stage. You know, payment on the invoice needs to be the same as the bank statement. Receipt not properly filled out, you know, say no address, no VAT number, not broken down. Credit note take off. This may relate to more than one investment. Certs, missing parts of certs. And I suppose after the deadline date, there is a penalty of 1% per working week, up to a max of 12 weeks. So I suppose if you don't hit the deadline, you know, penalty isn't huge, but at the same time, I suppose there's 100% reduction in grant aid if claim is submitted 13 weeks more late. So I suppose we don't want anyone in that scenario. So I suppose I just finish up by saying, I suppose it's a very good scheme. You know, like I suppose it helps to, for any farmers, it helps to make their life, doing proper plan building work, I suppose, make things easier on the farm. Obviously putting in safety measures in place on the farm to make life that bit easier for individuals who are working there every day. So I suppose everyone, you know, like I'd say, we're going to have the TAMS now for the current year with a couple of more tranches. So if people are planning to do some work on their farm, I suppose get in contact with your advisor and have a good discussion around it from the point of view of planning the development or even you know, doing the bit of fencing or whatever is needed in order to make that life that bit easier on your holding. The other thing I suppose I just want to say before I finish up is in the current tranche this closes on the 15th of April. Fertilizer spreaders for GPS fertilizer spreaders were available to all tillage farmers, but now they're available to all the grassland farmers. And the other thing that measures in the CAF investment scheme, they have been included in the current tranche of TAMS. So say computerized milk feeders or milk carts, they have been included in this current tranche. So look, I'll leave it at that, Seán, and if there's any questions, we'll take them at a later stage. Okay.
Okay, Conor, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. And good bit of detail there, but it's a very important scheme. It's an important year. I suppose coming, I suppose before the new cap comes, and that. So, yeah. Now, if you can stop sharing your screen there, Conor, and I'll ask at this stage Donal to come back in. A lot of questions in so far, and look, we'll hand over to Donal there, who can put the questions to our two speakers.
Yep, thanks very much, Seán. Because Seán said there are an awful lot of questions coming in, and thanks very much for your questions. I'm going to group them together as much as possible, just to try and get all covered and all I suppose categories of questions covered. So Charlie, I might go back to you first. There's a question here in relation to the BEAM scheme. Will the department let farmers know where they stand in relation to BEAM?
Yeah, they will, Donal, but I suppose there's always a but. They will, and they are sending out details, and there are details there on ag food if you want to go in on them, and we can go in as well as your advisor, and we can look at them. But I suppose the one thing that's frustrating with BEAM is that it seems to be a moving target. It's very hard to get it accurate. So the calculator maybe is the best way to go, but they are talking about generating a calculator as well. It hasn't been generated yet, but it's because your stock is continuously changing, but they will notify you. But it's just important to keep an eye on it. And the best advice I'd give to anyone is maybe get in contact with their advisor and work together over the next couple of months, and maybe just keep reviewing the figures as you go along. I know the reduction is 5%, but the advice we're giving most people is try and go for 6 or 7%, because the 5% mightn't just be, you're better off keep a couple of percent above it and keep yourself fully clear of it, okay?
And in relation to the calculators, Charlie, like you outlined in your presentation there, I suppose that the nitrogen figures that are up on ag food, that farmers can check. If a farmer isn't set up on ag food, is it possible for the advisor to inform them of those figures on ag food? At the end of year figures, or to email them or to communicate with them what that figure might be to help guide them?
Yeah, it is. So I suppose there's two ways of doing it. The farmer can have his own ag food account that I would have mentioned during the presentation. And I suppose the advice would be, as time goes along, it's probably better for farmers to become more au fait with that system. But if they're not on ag food and not registered, which a lot of farmers aren't, and they're with an advisor, the advisor will be able to go in and get that information either. So there's either or. So he can get on to his advisor, and the advisor will be able to give him the figures and work him through it. Yeah.
And in relation to the Excel spreadsheet that we as advisors use, Charlie, like I know it's a tool that's used, as you were outlining, just to try and project. It's only on a monthly basis. Can a farmer have access to that if they wish? A client have access to that if they wish?
Yeah. Yeah, I know I personally have sent them out to a number of farmers. We can email them out once you have Excel on your computer. There's no reason why you can't use it. But I suppose I'd always give a word of caution. You probably need to use it in conjunction with your advisor. It's not that I want you to be forced to use us, but it's, of my experience, as I'm working over, I think, well over 20 years. And what I would say is it's probably the most finicky, awkward scheme that I've seen been produced, because the 5%, it just, as I say, it's a moving target, and you'd nearly want to be guiding the farmer all the time. But yeah, the answer to your question is we can send it out. The farmer can use it and project his figures forward. But I tell him at the same time liaise with his advisor, because it's a tricky scheme to kind of to keep on top of.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. There's one or two more in relation to BEAM. So look, I think we're as well stick on BEAM when we are talking about it again. The reduction, the 5% reduction, is that for that year only, or does a certain level of reduction have to be held after the period, the reference period that we're in now?
Yeah, I'm glad that question was asked, because it's probably something I should have mentioned in the presentation. Yeah, the 5% is only for the time you have to reduce. So I suppose there's two choices now. You can go from the 1st of July, as I mentioned, 2020 to the 30th of June 2021, or else you can pick this new reference period, which is for all of 2021. But that 5% reduction is only for that period. So once it's over, so if you're finished at the end of June this year, you can go back to do whatever you want to do at that stage. Yeah.
Okay. Just a question just from a dairy farmer that's tuned into us. Is the dairy cows, the organic nitrogen figure for them, is that not gone up to 89 kgs of nitrogen from the 1st of January of this year?
Yeah, it has, Donal. But for the purposes of the beam, it's still at 85. That was agreed, because when the figures were looked at, they were going from the middle of 18 to the middle of 19, and cows were 85 at that stage. So the thought that if they change that to 89 now, it would just skew the figures a small bit. So they've agreed to continue with that at 85. But yeah, the person is correct in that from now on, if you're doing out nitrates figures, or if you're looking at figures for dairy cows going forward for any other scheme or any other department thing, it's 89 for all the other schemes. So it's just 89. It's just 85 for beam at this present time. Yeah.
Okay. And just one last question on beam, and I'll give you a break then, Charlie. How does either getting additional land this year for their BPS or losing land, how does either of those scenarios affect the level of reduction that you have to meet? In other words, a 5% reduction.
Doesn't make any difference, Donal. So the figures that we put up there that were mentioned about the kilos of nitrogen. So what they've looked at is an overall figure. So whether you have lost or gained land, it's still that figure they are looking at. It's not connected to land whatsoever. So they've left it fairly, I suppose. There's no real way of getting away with it. You can't reduce it by reducing your land, or vice versa. So it's totally based on the animals you have, and that's it. Land doesn't really come into it at all.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Right, Conor, I'll just move across to you now at this stage. So TAMS, I suppose, in terms of the current tranche, as you were saying, finishes in mid-April, Conor, is there likely to be another tranche after that, or is there any information on that at this stage?
At yet, Donal, there's no information. I suppose the scheme was sort of due to end, like all things, at the end of 2020, but I suppose it's been rolled over. But I suppose the thing about the TAMS is they don't announce a new tranche until the last one is closed. So the likelihood is that there'll be probably 3 more tranches, but until they get closer to the deadline of the 15th of April, they normally don't announce them until that stage. So
okay, that's fine. In terms of grant aid for putting up a concrete pad, or ancillary concrete, I suppose is what we call it, along a shed, I presume that's an existing cattle shed. Now the question just doesn't specify exactly, but can you give the scenario, I suppose, Conor, in terms of can you get grant aid for ancillary concrete on an existing shed, and the scenario where you could get it on a new shed, new build under TAMS?
Yeah. Well, I suppose, the grant aid is available to a new build or whatever, where you have, say that the ancillary concrete can get up to 8 meters along the working length or width of the shed, depending on which you choose. So you can use it either down one side or across the front or whatever. So it's basically up to 8 meters of ancillary concrete.
Okay, that's fine. Just 1 or 2 comments here in regards to the reference costs. I know you mentioned, Conor, that you either get 40% of the reference costs or 40% of the receipted costs, whichever is less.
Yeah.
How, I suppose there's a particular concern to farmers at the moment, particularly with building projects, is the price of steel. What's your experience in terms of, do the reference costs change? There's a few comments there that feel that they don't match in too closely to costs on the ground, or what's your feeling there?
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, look, I suppose that would have been a criticism, and I suppose that the reference cost that they were working on for prior to this was October 19 or whatever. But now they've upgraded the reference cost there in January 21. And I suppose we're working off those figures now. Some of them have changed, some of them haven't. But I suppose the big thing is in the costing of a project. I know, look at construction costs and steel, as you say, has gone up. But I suppose the big thing to do is to shop around and price the particular project. Within to 3 or 4 different people. And I suppose the other thing is, if you have the ability to do some of the work yourself, on the, be it digger work or whatever, you can claim for that. Any works included, you can claim for that yourself, which helps to cut down the cost.
Okay, that's fine. So, Charlie, Conor, I have a few more questions for you, but I'll just hop back to Charlie here now for a minute. Charlie, in regards to the BPS scheme, there has been some mention that there could be a scheme for weighing dairy-born calves. Have you any information on that at the moment?
Yeah, again, I'm glad that question was brought up. Again, I suppose when we're talking about BPS tonight, I suppose we're assuming that a lot that is going to continue on the same as last year. And that's kind of the information we're getting. It may be slightly different, but we're assuming it's going to continue on the same, and more than likely it will. But there's also going to be a scheme there for dairy-born calves, €20 a calf for the first 20 calves. So that's coming in this year as well. Okay.
Okay. There's one or two comments too in relation to, and questions in relation to. So I suppose, Charlie, could you just kind of just reiterate the scenario where if I'm an autumn calf and suckler farmer, I'm going weaning calves now shortly, in regards to BPS, what would your advice be in regards to complying with the
probably
scheme?
Two choices. Yeah, probably two choices. What I would do is, I would, personally speaking, I would weigh them if it's a thing that they're going to be sold or weaned in the next while, which would be typical of them types of calves. So that information can be just kept in a record sheet, and when the BEEP scheme does open, you can record it at that stage. Or there is a weigh-in chart on the ICBF there at the moment. You could record it on that as well. So the main thing is to weigh them. As I say, the BPS isn't open at the moment, so you can't record it the same as you would have last year. So I suppose you can record in a record book, put it onto the system when it opens, or else on the weigh-in chart there on ICBF at the moment, you could push up on that, and then you have a record of it there as well,
Okay. Meal feeding, is there a minimum amount of meal that has to be fed for the BPS scheme? I know the terms and conditions aren't out this year yet, but based on last year?
Yeah, based on last year, I think once you're feeding a kilo and a half, you're okay. There doesn't seem to be a minimum requirement, but I think you're looking at in around 1 or 2 kilos. I think a kilo and a half, if you can prove you're feeding that, you should be fine,
Okay, and just one last question just before I hop back to Conor. In regard to the BDGP scheme, on BDGP, the bull has to be 5 stars at the time it was bought. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. So if I was advising someone what to do, I'd advise them to buy a 4 or 5 star geonomically tested bull at the time. But if it were a thing, you bought a bull and he wasn't a geonomically tested 4 or 5 star bull, you could test him afterwards. But the danger then is, if you test him and he comes back at 2 or 3 star, he's no good to you. And the 30th of June is coming very quickly. So I suppose your advice would be, if you're buying a bull, buy him geonomically tested 4 or 5 star, and then you have no worries about him. You're taking a chance if he's not geonomically tested, because there's always the danger he will decrease. As I say, when you send off a sample, they don't come back straight away. It usually takes a couple of months for them to come back. It can be done, but it's risky. Okay,
that's fine. Okay, thanks, Charlie. We're very tight on time, so Conor, just a few more questions for you. A couple of questions in regards to the planning permission or planning exemption. Can you just reiterate, Conor, like, let's say you're in that waiting period for your planning permission, it's due back the end of April. What's the story there? Can we make a TAMS application, or is that possible, or what do you do?
I suppose it basically, you have to have your full planning permission or whatever in hand at the time of application. So you have to lodge your full planning permission. So a grant of planning permission is not acceptable or whatever. You just lodge your full planning permission with your application. Or if you don't require planning permission, you have to, say, put in, if you have a letter of exemption, either or will cover you in that scenario.
Okay. And in regards to looking for the TAMS grant on lease land, is that possible? So if a farmer wants to build a shed on lease land, let's say if they have a long-term lease or leasing from a family relative.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I suppose you need, so I suppose the big problem with it, I suppose, or where lads encounter problems with it, is the length of time. You need 5 years from the date of claim or whatever. So, you need probably, if you're embarking on this process, but a 6 or a 7 year lease to cover you would be a better scenario. But it is available on leased land to do development work. Yeah.
Is there a TAMS grant available on replacement cattle slats, including manhole slats?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the big thing is, say that there is availability of the for both in the TAMS application. Yeah.
And slat mats, is there the rubber mats?
No.
Are they granted?
No, they're not granted. So they're not. No.
Okay. That's fine. Just there's one very last question for Charlie there, just in regards to beam. I suppose it's a two-part question. Number one, Charlie, in regards to if you didn't meet the beam requirement of reduction of 5%, is there a sliding scale? Is there any tolerance if let's say if you're at 4.8% or 4.7% or 3.5%? Like, is there tolerance there?
Yeah, there seems to be very slight, I suppose you could say, a slight tolerance. So what the information we're getting back is that, just say you hit, so for every 0.2% that you're away from it, you lose 20%. So just for argument's sake, if you're at 5, obviously you're okay. If you're at 4.8%, you lose 20%, 4.6%, you lose 40%, 4.4%, you lose 60%, 4.2, 80%. And as far as we're aware, once you go under 4%, that you don't get anything. So it is quite tight. And the penalty ramps up and increases quite quickly. So I suppose the advice would be try and avoid that situation at all.
And for farmers that are down with TB, Charlie, is there going to be an allowance there for those farmers? If they're in a position that they can't sell cattle through the marts, or privately, like what they normally would do.
Yeah, like with TB, I suppose, like every scheme, it's regarded as a force majeure situation. So these will all be looked on an individual basis. So I'd imagine the best thing to do in that case would be contact the department, tell them exactly what your situation is, and with TB, normally they'll give due recognition to what happens on your farm. So I'd say that's the best approach there.
Okay. Look, there was an awful lot of questions coming in. Hopefully, I've covered most of them. And all of them at that. So look, Seán, I'll hand back to you.
Okay, great. Donal, thank you very much for compiling the questions there and putting them to the two panelists. I want to thank both Conor and Charlie for presenting this evening, and well done to you all. And thanks to everybody who signed in this evening for this webinar. Great to see a good attendance at this webinar. So going forward, we'll be having more webinars. They'll be on Monday evenings at 8 p.m. We have a lot of important deadlines coming up over the next while as regards BPS and the Young Farmers Scheme and the new organic schemes. So no doubt we'll be having a webinar in the next couple of weeks on that. So anyone who has signed up for tonight's webinar will receive an email about the next one, and we'll be sending a text out to all clients. Keep an eye to the newspapers. We'll have adverts and articles regarding it, and you can see on the top left hand side of your screen here our social media channels and email address. So thanks for everybody who attended, and best of luck. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, lads. Bye now.